Hey everybody, this is Colton with POSGuys.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Colorworks C4000 inkjet label printer from Epson. Now this is the entry-level model to Epson's line of inkjet printers, and thus it is probably by far the most popular printer in that line. It stands out from some of our other label printing options in the fact that it is an inkjet printer, right, as opposed to a traditional thermal printer. And Epson is of course known for their standard inkjet printers, so it's only natural that they would sort of, take that knowledge and apply it to a label printer. So, of course, being an inkjet label printer, you're going to get the color, which is a big departure from traditional thermal printing, which can only sort of do black and grayscale. And because of that, it does offer a few advantages, but also opens up some new possibilities and, of course, some drawbacks, right? It's all give and take. So what I thought I would do today is sort of take a look at the unit, talk about the specs, of course, sort of see what some of the print jobs look like, and I'll touch very briefly on some of the pros and cons that come with thermal printing versus inkjet label printing, because there are definitely some notable ones. I won't go into too much detail. We'll probably make a separate video on that a little bit later, doing a deep dive, because it's a whole video in itself. So we'll definitely get into that at a later time. But today we're going to look strictly at the printer and kind of talk about its performance. And I'll talk a little bit about pros and cons, mainly as it relates to more of an operational and operating the printer standpoint. So with that, I will zoom us on in here, get a little in close, and we'll start to explore the printer a little bit more. All right, so let's address the low-hanging fruit here. The first, of course, this is an inkjet label printer, so it's going to work a little bit differently than a traditional thermal printer. The biggest, of course, being that instead of using a print head that uses heat to apply ribbon, you're going to have thousands of tiny little print heads, much like a regular inkjet label printer. They're going to shoot ink onto the label. And you have a couple advantages because of that. The first is the resolution on this printer. So while a standard thermal printer mid-range could probably get to about 300 dpi, this can get all the way up to 1200 dpi. It can do that at about 1.7 inches per second on a 4-inch wide label. And it could do about 360 by 360 dpi at 3.4 inches per second while printing on 4-inch media. So it is definitely a little bit slower overall than compared to a traditional thermal printer, but you're definitely making up for it with the additional resolution. So that's going to allow you to print really tiny barcodes and really tiny text without having to worry about it getting blurry. So think of a standard product label, right? You can get really, really tiny on that, and it's going to work out just fine. So if you're doing like a two-step printing process, this is definitely one advantage that you'll have over kind of, having to use a thermal printer on a pre-printed label. Another advantage is that the print head, or the nozzle rather, on this is built to last for the life of the unit. So instead of having a traditional print head that burns out occasionally and you're going to have to replace it a couple times within its life cycle, this thing is built to last. It has a couple cool features that sort of help extend that life. So there's onboard sensors that sort of detect if nozzles are clogged, because that is definitely something that you have to worry about when you're dealing with ink. And what it will do is if it detects that a nozzle is clogged, all the other nozzles around it will sort of compensate to sort of cover that up until the printer can get to the next cleaning cycle. And then, obviously during the next cycle, it would clean and repair itself and you'd be up and running. While the nozzle itself is rated for the life of the printer, there are other components that might need to be serviced later on in the product's life cycle. The feeding mechanism is designed to handle approximately 6 million miles worth of media before any potential failure. And additionally, the auto cutter has different ratings depending on the media used. So anywhere ranging from 1.5 million cuts on standard paper to about 300,000 to 500,000 cuts with synthetic media. So, I'll kind of open up the printer here so you can start to take a look. And I know it's kind of hard from the top-down view here, so I'm going to go ahead and throw some B-roll up that I took, kind of just giving you a close-up. But the inside of the printer looks relatively similar to some of the drop-in clamshell printers. Definitely looks different than an industrial label printer, of course. So now turning our attention to the media options, as I noted earlier. The C4000 accommodates media up to 4.1 inches wide on a 1.5 or 2 inch core if you're going to be loading it inside the printer here. Though it does, of course, as I noted, have the little back entrance so that you can use an external roll holder like this to use some especially large media. And of course, that would just feed through the back here, wrap in, and then you would just close it in like that. And I'll show that off a little bit later when we're I'm kind of walking you through what printing a label to this printer actually looks like. So just kind of keep that noted in the back of your head. The versatility on the printer extends to the types of media it supports as well. So, along with the traditional roll of labels, you can also achieve fanfold media, black marked labels, wristbands, and of course you're gonna be able to cover synthetic materials and even regular old plain paper as well if you really want to. Additionally, the optional printer tray can be used to attach, it can kind of be used to attach to the front for convenient cutting of multiple single labels using the auto cutter. And I'll throw a photo of that accessory now so you can kind of take a look at that. So there are two major types of ink that you can use with this printer. There's matte and gloss. And the key difference lies in the type of black ink that's used. All the other colors are the same. It's just the black that kind of differentiates it, right? A gloss ink is going to offer a slightly shinier finish and allows printing on a wider variety of substrates. On the other hand, matte black ink delivers a more darker, kind of sharper black text than images that are used with matte media. And it's important to note that because while the gloss printer can handle both gloss and matte printing, the matte is limited to only using matte ink only. And once you use the matte ink, switching back to the gloss ink is not possible. So if you prefer that flexibility, the gloss option might be the better choice. And as just a quick point of clarification, the printer is the same regardless. It's just the type of ink that's used, right? So as soon as you load up that matte ink, you're kind of restricted a little bit in terms of what ink you can use. So let's talk a little bit about how to get this printer all set up and ready to go. I've already loaded up the ink here. It's a very simple snap in and out. And I've already installed the maintenance box here as well, so we don't have to worry about that. But I've plugged it in via USB, got the little cable here. You can also connect this over with Ethernet. Then there are some optional adapters that will kind of give you some Wi-Fi connectivity as well, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And so if we kind of, before I do into that, let's actually load up the ribbon. That's pretty important. So loading ribbon is actually pretty darn easy. If you're using a standard label, of course, roll of labels, you can just kind of stick them in here if they have the correct size, of course. For this demonstration, I'll be using sort of a back-fed roll because I'm fancy like that. And so I just have a little spool adapter here. And it's pretty easy to feed through. Just kind of feed it through this back hatch, slap it in there, pull the labels through, and kind of get it loaded in there. Feed it one more time just to get it to the right size. And there you go. We are set to go. You might be hearing this right now. Maybe. We'll see. There's definitely a little bit of a hum to the printer. And that is one thing that I definitely want to make a note of, is that this printer can be kind of loud, just in general while it's on. It's periodically going through cleaning phases and kind of doing different things. So there's always a fan that's kind of running in the background. So you definitely want this like in your front of house, on your front desk counter, or just kind of sitting in the middle of an area where a bunch of people are working. Your coworkers might not like that. So now that we have this all set up and ready to go, ink's loaded. One thing with the ink too, when you initially push the ink in for the first time, the printer has to kind of prime itself and get all the tubes loaded. So you'll see that the little indicators here show the ink status. And the first time you plug in the ink, those are going to go down a decent bit. Don't worry about that. That's normal. It's just the ink kind of getting loaded into the system. It's not like you lost it, right? So let's zoom on over here to the computer. We have this connected up over Windows, but this will also support Mac and Linux. There's some drivers as well. And we're going to be showing two different ways of sending a print job today. I have Bartender pulled up here, but we're also going to show how to print something with over PDF as well. So like I said, I'm using Bartender, though the printer has integration with most of the industry's major label printing softwares. So you're also going to get Nice Label, TechLinks, Enable as well. You're going to have SAP integration. So between all of those options and the connectivity options that I noted before, no matter what type of label printing solution you're using, they should be able to drop in with some ease. Of course, it's going to have ZPL2 and ESC emulation, as is pretty standard with label printers nowadays. So that's just one little thing to keep in mind here. So I've already kind of gone through the work of setting up a pretty initial template that we want to print here. Bartender makes it pretty easy. I've set up a little test barcode here, and I'll make it a little tinier too, because I kind of want to push it to its limits. We're going to Control P, get the print job going, and we'll do 3 copies. Why not? So I'll push through there. A little pop-up should come up because I'm in the bleed. Yes, perfect. All right. And we'll wait for it to send to the print shop. It definitely does take a little bit. Oh, and it's paused right now because I opened the ink, turn that off. And we'll wait for it to do its thing. It can take a little bit sometimes, but it's thinking real hard. It's thinking. It's thinking. Yeah, it's definitely one thing to note is that the printer could be a little slow for sure. There we go. There we go. It's doing its thing. So it's pushing out the labels. All right, and we'll cut. Oh, that's the feed. Cut. Thank you. And we have the labels pulled up here. So as you can see, they are pretty darn nice, and I think that the lights here are kind of blurring this out, so I'll do some B-roll as well so you can get a little bit of a closer look. But yeah, I think that the color is very nice for sure. You're definitely kind of getting that saturation that you'd be looking for. If you will zoom in on this little QR code, you can see, because it's actually pretty crisp there, and I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to test this later on. I'm going to try to scan this code and see if it actually pulls up, and you should see that in the B-roll footage as well. So if that all scans and we're good to go, then we're set. You know, the one thing I will kind of note with this printer is that it is definitely harder to use than a standard thermal printer, especially with laying out the labels and making sure that they print exactly like you like. I threw up some B-roll footage earlier, and I'll throw it back up here that kind of shows what the printer is capable of. It's capable of printing some very nice, high-quality media, very sharp, crisp lines. But you're definitely going to need to do your research to figure out how to get it set up correctly, because there's a lot of settings that you need to sort of play with to get it just right. So that is definitely one thing to keep in mind with this printer, is that, if you're looking to get really high-grade professional labels produced, you're definitely going to have to invest a little bit of time in getting it all set up correctly. So that's just something to note with the printer. But overall, it's relatively intuitive, especially if you're using a label designer tool like this. This side of things is pretty simple. So with that, I'll kind of zoom into the next part of this video, and that's talking about the LCD screen on this particular unit. So I'll do a little zoom in here because it's a little easier to show. But let's say that for some reason, the label didn't print exactly as you'd like, and you wanted to adjust some of the settings or perform some troubleshooting. And you could do that relatively easy using the LCD screen that's on the front. It's 2.7 inches wide, and there's a little 9-pin keypad there. It is not touchscreen. I have definitely tapped this thing a number of times thinking it's a touchscreen. So that is one thing to note. And what we found from all of the testing on the unit is that the touchscreen is pretty darn comprehensive. There's very few things that we had to go to a computer to kind of configure on this device. Epson made it really easy to adjust just about any setting on the printer using this LCD screen pad there. So, anything from label and media sizes to the print resolution. You could do all the standard troubleshooting features on there. There's some really cool on-screen instructions that kind of walk users through how to do some basic maintenance on it, replacing ink, replacing labels, replacing that media box, or sorry, the maintenance box rather, that needs to be replaced on it periodically. So it's a pretty darn comprehensive screen. So that is really good to note. Moreover, sort of on a similar vein with maintenance, Epson does offer a robust roadmap management tool. So, it kind of provides that additional convenience for having to manage the printer from a distance. So if you have 10 of these kind of operating on a fleet, you can get some feedback on them and kind of keeping the, kind of manually set them up and when you need to do that. So with all of these options at disposal, keeping this printer up and running should be a relatively smooth process. It's definitely a different mindset than with a thermal printer. There's definitely some more moving parts there. But overall, I think that it's a relatively easy unit to use, all things considered. But with that, if you have any questions about the printer, or interested in buying, definitely feel free to give us a call or an email. Both of those are on the screen now. Feel free also to visit our website. We have some blog posts up where we go into a little more detail on this particular unit and kind of highlight some examples on that. So with that, I appreciate your time and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Take care. Bye-bye.